And we are back with the second part of our conversations on COVID-19, a continuing series that's part of In Your Neighborhood. And our guest for the second part is Dr. Reggie Gazes from Bucknell University. Welcome, Dr. Gazes.
Thank you.
So give us a little bit of an idea of your background, Reggie.
So I am a professor of psychology and animal behavior at Bucknell. So I've been at Bucknell for about 6 years now. And I teach a lot of classes in the field of animal behavior, but also some of the basic psychology courses that lean a little bit more towards the behavioral side of things. But I came to Bucknell from Zoo Atlanta, where I was a research postdoc down there. And a lot of what I worked on when I was there was communicating science with the public. So I spent a lot of time giving scientific talks there, and working with the people who worked at the zoo on how to more efficiently communicate scientific information.
It's very interesting you bring up the zoo aspect. First off, if anybody recognizes Reggie, she was on a previous episode of In Your Neighborhood where we went to their animal behavior center. I just want to ask you a question real quick about something that's in the news today. Were you surprised to hear that a tiger got this?
No, not really that surprised. I think actually the assumption from those of us who work with animals is usually that animals can catch things from humans, especially those of us who work with primates like I do. Monkeys and apes are very closely related to us, and they can either carry or catch a lot of the diseases that we have. So we're always very concerned about that when there's some sort of an outbreak of a human illness, that it may transfer to our animals. And so I know that zoos all over the country have been very careful trying to make sure that the caregivers don't give the illness to the animals. But I think we were all very relieved to hear that dogs can't get it. So that's good news for all of us at home.
So what kind of symptoms would a tiger exhibit then that gets an illness like this? Would it have the same as a human?
That's a really good question. I can't really answer that. So I'm not a feline expert. But yeah, oftentimes the symptoms that animals will have related to human diseases are either similar or can be worse or sort of less severe. So it depends on kind of how it takes up in them. So for tuberculosis, for example, tuberculosis is one that humans can get. That can also be caught by monkeys. When monkeys get it, though, the symptoms are way worse and it can be more deadly. In the reverse, there's often viruses that they carry that are not particularly deadly to them, but if we catch them, they can be really deadly for humans. And so it's a little bit different how every disease presents in different animals.
Okay, let's move on from that little tangent there. What classes are you teaching this semester at Bucknell?
So I'm teaching 2 classes at Bucknell right now. I'm teaching psychological research methods, and then I'm teaching a science communication course.
Okay, we'll get to the science communication course in a second, but what was your reaction to finding out that you were going to be teaching classes online?
Mixed, I think, like everyone. When I first heard the announcement, in some ways I was relieved because we were all very concerned about this pandemic and about what it meant for students living in close quarters on campus. We were concerned about what it meant for the animals on campus as well. As I said, we're trying to keep them healthy and safe, and having a lot of students around is a concern for us there. So in some senses I was relieved, but then of course there's the practical of how do you do that? And most of us don't have any experience teaching courses online. So this was new for us. It was very new for our students, who most of them have not had any experience learning online. So it was going to be an adjustment, and it was a little bit scary and overwhelming, but I think we got there.
And it's going pretty well so far?
Yeah, I've been very surprised actually at how well it's going. Everyone's struggling in their own ways, but overall I think all the faculty have really managed to come up with creative ways to take what used to be very hands-on, face-to-face types of courses and convert them in productive ways for the last few weeks of class here, so that the students are really going to get something out of the semester.
Were you also surprised as an animal behaviorist? I guess there has been conversation about an animal to human virus becoming a reality. So this really wasn't much of a surprise, was it?
Yeah, I mean, well, of course it's a surprise, right? You can never predict things quite like this. But yeah, there's been a number of cases of diseases being transmitted from animals to humans. And so it's always there in the back of our minds. And we have faculty at Bucknell who study this wildlife disease transmission. So we are keenly aware of this as a problem.
So at what point did you, or maybe the students in the science communications class, realize that there was some way that this could become a teachable moment for them?
Yeah, so when we found the announcement, we were all on spring break when the announcement came out about the shift to online courses. And so I was in Florida, my students were all over the world. And so I wanted to touch base with them and just figure out what they were feeling and what they were thinking and what logistics would be possible when we got back to the semester. And so I sent them all out a little survey, just asking them, questions like, what time zone do you live in? Because that was something that we now have to take into account. They're not all in the same place now. And then also just asking them, is there anything that you want us to do now that we have the rest of the semester to kind of rethink the course? And the nice thing about my science communication class is it's all seniors or graduate students, and it's not required for any major. It's just a class that a lot of students decided to take because they thought it would be useful for them either in their future careers. Some of them want to go into zoo work. I have one student who wants to be a pharmaceutical representative, and she thought it would be good to learn how to talk more about science to people who were not necessarily experts in science. So we have a lot of flexibility with what we do with the class. And the class itself was actually designed to be a community-based learning course where we were working with the Children's Museum in Lewisburg, designing activities and exhibits for them. But since we can't do that anymore, now we had to really rethink it. And so we had total freedom. And so I asked the students, what do you want to do? And a number of students said, why don't we talk about coronavirus? We've been talking all semester about how science is communicated and how rare it is for people to be talking about science with each other. You don't usually see people talking to their parents and their best friends and their grandmothers about science, but suddenly we do, right? We find ourselves in an environment where science communication is happening all around us constantly right now. And so the students got excited about that. So we really did turn this into sort of a teachable moment in looking at how we can communicate more effectively about this and how different communication sources are talking about it.
So what have they been able to accomplish up to this point? Are you touching base with them on a daily basis, a weekly basis?
Kind of a mix. So we're doing something that's called asynchronous learning, which is what a lot of schools have chosen to do, which is basically that we're not meeting as a class on a regular basis because, internet problems, time zone issues, there's all sorts of challenges with trying to get everyone in a room at the same time. So instead what we're doing is setting things up so that they have a set of assignments they have to complete. They're working in pairs so that they do have a partner, they have a social outlet, and they have somebody to check in with. But that gives them more flexibility in scheduling when they do that. So they've been turning things in. So last week, they did an assignment where they went out and found examples of good and bad graphical portrayals of something about the coronavirus crisis. So it might be death rates, it might be spread rates, it could be almost anything. So they went out and found those, and then we created an online discussion board where they posted them, they talked about what they thought was good and bad about them, different students commented on those things. So that was a great place for us to start thinking about how is this information being put out there in the world, and how does it fit with what we know as science communicators are effective or not effective. And then the next thing that they started working on is creating their own way of communicating about coronavirus to other people.
So I take it from the get-go, one of the main focuses is the media and how they're getting that information out. And then I also read that the class is going to focus to a large extent on appealing to their peers who may not be taking this seriously or may not be getting the right information, apparently.
Yeah, so one of the early things that we noticed, like right when we got back to classes, was that there were students all over the country, still on spring break. There were people still throwing parties and getting together. And that it seemed that that group of students, the sort of like 18 to 22-year-old college students who are unlikely to catch this disease in any very serious way, were having trouble understanding the severity of it and understanding their connection to it. You know, that even if they had no symptoms, even if they weren't likely to get sick, they could be spreading it to other people by being out and about, and that was causing problems. So I figured, I don't really know very well how to talk to 18-year-olds, but my students do. They're experts at talking to their peers. And so what we decided to do was they got into pairs, and each pair set up some way of communicating about the need to stay at home, the need to social distance to their peers. And they could do it any way they wanted. They could use any media they wanted. They could create videos or an Instagram story or whatever it was that they chose to do. And so they just turned those in, and they're really great. They came up with some very creative stuff that I would never have thought about.
What I know this is through you, but what were some of the things they seemed to feel why there was such a disconnect with these peers of theirs, with the information that's out there?
So I think in some respects, it was a lack of clear information. So for a while, even the CDC's website wasn't saying that if you were asymptomatic, you could be passing this on. That message was not very clearly out there in the media. And so I think now that we know that, now that there's more research and that it's been made clear, just putting that information out helps a little bit. The other thing that a lot of them identified was that students don't want to be alone. It's very hard for them at this very social time in their life to step back from that. And so the risk of spreading the virus versus the cost of sort of cutting out this very important part of their social life can be a challenge. And so some of the things that some of the groups came up with were to create kind of a social environment around the social distancing. So one of the groups came up with a very creative 14-day stay-at-home challenge for Instagram, where every day there was a little calendar they put together, and for every day there was another little silly thing that you should do and post to your Instagram account. And that way you could get involved with doing these things with your friends over social media, even though you were at home. And so it created that social community while still allowing people to socially distance from one another, which I thought was very creative.
So at some point, the media plays a role in this because they're the main purveyor of sorts for information. And did the kids look at what the media could be saying or doing differently about the message?
They did, to a certain extent. So they did think about the kinds of messaging that's out there. So we've spent the semester thinking about how do you effectively communicate information to people, right? And what we know is that when you make it personal to them, and when you make it simple, that's when people understand things the best. And so when they're looking at the information that's out there, it may be hard for people, let's take their peers, for example. It may be hard for their peers to understand that their behavior in Lewisburg connects to old people dying in Italy, right? That's a really distant thing for them, and they may not be able to make that connection. And so what you have to do then is you have to bring it closer. And so one of the things that some of the students chose to do was say, well, we know that you're probably not going to get sick from this virus as an 18-year-old student, but your grandmother might, your parents might. And so they chose to say, you need to make choices that keep your family safe, right? So taking it from that big global issue and bringing it down to something that's more personal. We know that that's really effective. And so they've looked at the media, and in some cases we see that the media is bringing in very localized information, which helps a lot, like shows like this, right, where we're talking about our local community where people are much more connected. But sometimes you see things on this more global scale, which is a little harder for people to comprehend.
How are they doing overall with this whole situation? Have you talked with them about that, how they're dealing with it? And does something like this, a project like this, give them purpose, something to do so that keeps their mind off what's going on around them, the bigger picture?
I think overall, I'm really impressed with how the students have been handling things, with how everybody's been handling things, right? The whole world has now been thrown into a weird situation that none of us were really prepared for. And it's hard. I think everyone is struggling with the balance of how do you deal with what's going on externally in the world and the stress that brings, and also try and keep some sense of normalcy, right? How do you do your classwork and see that as an important part of your life when you're worried about your family's health and well-being, right? But a lot of our students have found that it is helpful to have their work to continue with because it gives them that sense of normalcy. And this project has been really interesting because it was kind of driven by the students, and I'm trying not to put too much on them because I know there's a lot going on. What I let them do with this project was I said, once you've created this information to share with your peers, it's up to you if you want to get feedback, revise it, and then put it out in the world. And most of the groups have chosen to do that process. And so they're now peer reviewing each other's. They're looking at each other's products. I'm giving them some feedback. They're going to make some tweaks. Of course, in the week that they worked on them, a lot has changed in the world. So even some of the information that they put into these assignments is no longer accurate. But what a lot of them have said to me is, this gives me a sense of agency. It feels like something I can do to contribute. And it feels like I have a little bit of control over how this information about this pandemic is out there in the world. And that makes them feel, I think, a little bit more sense of purpose right now.
So will it just be amongst the class that what they accomplished so far, or will it be something that could possibly be put out there?
We're hoping that we're going to be able to put it out there more broadly. So the products that the students have turned in have all been in different places. So some of them are like YouTube videos, some of them are more Instagram focused accounts. So it'll depend what the media is that they chose, how we're going to be able to disseminate that information. But the ultimate goal is for the groups that have chosen to take that route, we're going to be putting it out there, and we hope that it will be useful for their peers in trying to understand what's going on.
Is it something, the information, is it something just for college-age kids, or could it also apply to high school-age kids?
Oh yeah, well, the information is the information, right? So it applies to all of us. But of course, the audience that they're targeting is younger people. But I do think that, yeah, high school students, even, newly graduated students from colleges, or young people in general, all of these things are going to apply. So hopefully it will have a broader message than just college students.
So I've been ending all my segments by asking my interviewees how they're dealing with this whole thing personally. And I just wanted to ask you that as well.
Hanging in there. My kids are home with me from school. And my husband is as well. So all of us trying to manage our work and manage our daily lives is an interesting challenge, but we're trying to take it as positive and enjoy the time together as a family and enjoy the nice weather out in our backyard now that it's warming up a little bit, get some gardening done. So we're trying to be as positive as we can.
Okay. Dr. Reggie Gazes from Bucknell University. Dr. Gazes, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Chris, for having me.
Okay. There you go. That is another episode of Conversations on COVID-19, a special series from In Your Neighborhood. And we will have more of these in the coming future, so keep an eye out for them. Stay safe, everyone.